I'm Robert Snyder. I'm the president of the Island Institute, and welcome to Waypoints 2019. Now, if that audio program had ended halfway through, I think for me at least, it would have felt as if it was the narrative I was expecting to hear about the coast of Maine. It had the voices we expect to hear. It had the subject of our identity that we care so much about. It focused on the fishing industry and working waterfronts and how they're changing. But it also, I think, had an uplifting tension to it. There are new voices bringing a new story of the Maine coast and what is happening here into the dialogue. So just like waypoints help us find our way on a journey, I feel like the voices that we add to our conversation every day bring us closer to figuring out what the future holds. I've been very fortunate over the last 16 years. I would imagine that close to half the people here have invited me to their kitchen tables, their churches, their town halls. They want to talk about the future. They care about the issues they're leading on. And I always have lots of questions, and I've been met with incredible unconditional kindness and caring, which to me just defines an incredibly important element of this coast. Now, I've also been yelled at like I've never been yelled at before in my life, and that's saying something, because I was a bad kid at one time. And so that to me was this kind of realization that where is this coming from? It's coming from intense passion, incredible intention, people who really want to figure it out. And they're willing to struggle through the hard work of dealing with all different points of view. One of the staff people that I work with, Yvonne Thomas, who many of you may know, earlier this week she described the relationship between Maine residents and the land as a relationship between blood and bone. They're infinitely intertwined. It cannot be undone. And what it made me realize in reflecting on my own experience was that every one of these conversations is changing me. Every bit of every little point that people try to make is a different way that I'm being changed by Maine every day and through all of my time at the Institute. And at the same time, it started causing me to realize that I have a lot of ownership of and responsibility for the way I'm changing Maine. Every single time I engage with somebody, I know that in some small way, ways that I can't always see, the coast of Maine is changing too. So my wish for you all today, as you're part of this forum, is that you will think about the ways in which you have a responsibility for leaving here and making the kinds of changes that I know you are all here to make in this state. This is a room filled with leaders. I know it. And every one of you have led very difficult changes. And for that, I think everybody is grateful because it means there are just a tremendous number of arrows in everyone's back in this place. It's very hard to lead. I feel like if you can do that, think about how you are also being changed by this place, then I think we'll all be better off. We've built a program that ultimately forces us to grapple with some of the biggest challenges we face in the future. And with that, I'd like to invite Suzanne MacDonald, my colleague, up to continue the conversation and also to welcome all of you and to all of those who are online watching us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is such a fantastic turnout for today. We're really impressed and humbled that so many of you would take your time to be here today. Let's look around for a moment at who's here. So while there may be many, familiar faces, I know that we all do our work in different ways. But today, I also know that we are connected by people and place. We share a vision for and a commitment to building a more resilient coast of Maine. And for right now, we're kind of stuck in the same boat for the next few hours. This afternoon is time for work. I understand it's Friday afternoon, you've left your offices, here you are. But we actually are here to find some new ways at looking at the issues that are shaping the coast of Maine. I'm asking you to find inspiration in what you hear today, to question yourself and question each other, and to challenge yourself to find new ways of working, to make commitments to new ways of working, and to recommit to what you already know rings true. Thanks for taking the chance on joining us this afternoon. Let's really make the most of it. Okay. So my time at the Island Institute, I've been up and down the coast, out to the islands of Maine and in other states and in other countries. My job has been to help communities find practical challenges to really tricky stuff. How do you keep the lights on affordably 22 miles in the middle of the ocean? How do you transport propane in bulk safely in the middle of the nastiest winter weather to keep homes warm on islands? And how do you engage communities constructively, respectfully, in conversations about new ocean uses like offshore wind? Like the audio intro we just heard, this work at times has been filled with discomfort, tension, uncertainty, and sometimes fear. We've found ourselves asking who we are and who we should be. The path forward is generally never clear, and time is always limited. Making it work on the coast of Maine isn't easy. More recently, I had the chance to help tell this story through the Waypoints Community Indicators publication. We found through data collection and analysis that our coast's smallest communities, most of which are all east of here in Portland, have the lowest median household incomes, the oldest average age, and the greatest dependence on resource extraction like fishing and farming. We know that island and coastal residents have some of the highest percentages of self-employed people and that work seasonally, much, much more than the rest of the state or the country. And we know that the wage gap, when it comes to gender, exists, is well and alive here on this coast. We learned that the data infographics were really compelling, and the ability to make comparisons between places was really impactful. We hope that you'll find the same, and that's why we gave you a little thumb drive when you first checked in with all of the data supporting the documents that we've worked on. We hope that you can dig into the data on those thumb drives and put it to work as you tell your own stories about the coast of Maine. So data is really important, but I think what we've found is that when you're grappling with really tricky questions, the best place to start is by listening. In my work, listening isn't always easy. Sometimes we work in loud places on the back of a boat over a diesel engine, standing on top of the fuel delivery truck as it's loading up number 2 from the barge that showed up, or down in the sort of nasty boiler room at the bottom of a school. But I have to say, these are the places where I've learned the most, where people have changed my minds, helped me see new challenges and new opportunities. It's by listening that I've learned how some of our smallest communities are dealing with some really big problems. At the Island Institute, we know we do better when we start by listening. So we work really hard to create meaningful opportunities, hopefully like this one, for us to come together, to hear each other, and to dig into these questions. We know that we're at our best when we can learn from those who have come before us, and when we bring people that with new perspectives and new voices together in sometimes surprising ways. It makes us see these new opportunities and feel excited to move forward together. So it's with that listening that we'll start today. We're really fortunate to have 6 amazing individuals who are really leaning into their own respective work here on the coast of Maine. And because we know that part of listening is being present, we'll take just a moment. You can double check your phones, make sure that they're turned off, get settled into your seats, and hold on for the ride. So to start, I want to invite Sandra Stone up to the stage. You've got bios for all of the speakers in your programs. But I've come to know Sandra as a coach and as a mentor and as a leader for our state.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
You don't want to use the podium, right? You want to stand here? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Sandra Stone. I've been involved in Maine's innovation and entrepreneurial community for many years. I actually even have early roots in commercial fishing as well. Back in 1984, I was co-owner of North Atlantic, Inc., a commercial fishing vessel management and fish brokerage business that co-owned 3 commercial fishing vessels with the captains. By 2008, I was office manager and program manager at Maine Center for Entrepreneurial Development, a nonprofit incubator for startup businesses. At the accelerator, the work ethic of a young but resourceful founder had impressed me when he wanted to know, how do I turn on the heat at 2:30 in the morning? So I offered to invest when he had only one more day left, but still needed to raise another $10,000 in order to get an additional $150,000 in MTI matching grants. He had gratefully but apologetically declined, explaining that he could only accept funds from accredited investors, people who could check off the minimum income or asset requirements established by the SEC. He hadn't realized that I qualified. This was my very first angel investment, a company and team that I knew with a strong work ethic. In 2011, I was elected chair of the Maine Angels, a membership angel investment network. I was one of only 3 women. Building our deal flow pipeline, as well as growing a number of active investor members, were major organizational goals. Addressing the gender imbalance at the investment table was one of mine. So I challenged the membership, particularly the 30 men in the room, to bring a prospective female guest to one of our monthly meetings. Research has shown that ventures, as well as company boards of directors that have at least one woman on the team, have better performance and profitability, due in part to the diversity of thought and experience at the table. Research also tracks an increasingly positive impact when there is a cohort of differing perspectives. Maine Angels now has 18 female members out of the 71 investors, putting us at over 25%. I'm really proud of that. Thank you. The monthly meeting debrief discussions after each invited entrepreneur's presentation, as well as our diligence process, are both more robust and enriched by the greater depth and breadth of perspective, experience, and inquiry that our various members can now contribute. Data analytics has also shown that female founders attract just a fraction of the funds raised by men. This exposes the underutilization of important potential talent and energy of these entrepreneurial women. This research also indicates that the needs of many female consumers have been too often overlooked and dismissed. We are ignoring the needs of half of our consumer population. And women statistically are those with increasingly greater purchasing power due to increased participation in the workforce, longer expected lifespans, and inheritance. I remain convinced that the best way to untap the potential economic driver of more diverse founder initiatives and markets is to have more knowledgeable and networked women on the investor side of the table. However, I've discovered that often women my age and older are much more comfortable with philanthropy. They will willingly give generous 5-figure checks to causes they believe in, but getting back nothing tangible in return. These same individuals would rarely consider putting that same 5-figure amount into an early stage investment opportunity due to the risk concerns of losing it all. I feel the potential for empowering greater impact through investment is exponential. I personally do donate to charitable causes important to me. I do get the intangible satisfaction of making change in the lives of those served, in addition to the charitable tax deduction. However, for me, investing directly in Maine's future is so powerful, particularly when a company is focused on solving a problem or issue that I really care about and aligns with my values and vision. I get to be part of potentially creating employment, building sales and income tax revenues, and generating ripple effects throughout the value chain. Plus, for ventures that are approved by FAME, investors can apply to receive the Maine seed capital tax credit. And this allows us to deduct up to 50% of the investment amount from our own Maine state taxes over the next 4 years. This de-risks investor potential loss to just 50% and makes any returns just that more attractive. So I would really like to see a shift in perspective that gets others interested and knowledgeable about making a difference in this way, thoughtfully putting smart money to work, investing in opportunities in Maine's natural resources and the coastline. I really like that with increased awareness and skill building, as a qualified investor, I can make a significant difference and don't have to have a master's in finance in order to do so. Being a member of an angel group brings together a team of other members' respective strengths and complements my gaps. So what are today's compelling private investments? One successful value-based strategy is to invest in solid, undervalued market opportunities. Many prominent VCs feel there is oversaturation of social media and pure tech plays, and are now consciously seeking out underserved, overlooked sectors and innovators. So there is growing interest in initiatives applying technology to more traditional sectors like farming, fishing, and aquaculture. There is also escalating interest in traceability, sustainability, and more local sourcing of foods, products, and services. Plus, an increasing number of VCs are specifically seeking the previously ignored opportunities of investing in minority and female founders, where smart money and mentoring can make such a huge difference. I see a shift towards exploring new innovative processes in scalable production and markets for new sea, marine-based products on our natural resource frontier. This past year, I saw a solid business opportunity in the proposition of not shipping our main resources over to Asia to be processed and then imported back home to be purchased and consumed at a higher price. Determining how to capture the value add of growing out and processing our Maine eels and the processing of our own kelp, instead of importing it back as freeze-dried seaweed, these were two of Maine Angel's recent aquaculture investments. Even with higher US labor costs, there are still profitable margins when the expense of temperature-controlled, long-distance shipping, transportation, and export and import fees are eliminated. I don't have to personally eat the eels or the oysters to appreciate the compounding market growing opportunity for a venture that figures this out. I also see the successful surging of new microbreweries in the state and the interesting collaboration between their byproducts and the aquaculture sector. And might there be a national branding opportunity for Maine oysters, the way we have Maine lobsters? Those I like. Because I'm so passionate about investing in women founders, particularly Maine female leaders, I'm excited to see greater acceptance and equitable access to opportunities for women-owned and operated ventures. Small business and aquaculture appear to be an area where women can more fully participate when it is still so new for almost everyone, creating a more level playing field. I love the story of how symphonies use blind tryouts to discover and hire the best talent. The musician candidate is known only by their first initial and last name. They play their piece on a stage behind a screen and women are not even allowed to wear high heels due to the telltale distinctive sound of those shoes. The result has been a significant increase in the number of women offered those coveted positions in these orchestras. I want to know how to bring that forward so that we can bring forward our best and brightest regardless of their gender, their language, their skin color, culture, or other non-performance criteria as we begin to develop our opportunities along the coast. My vision for coastal communities is more one of fundamentally shifting the cultural way that investment funding and business growth gets done. Certainly, there are legacy fishing businesses and successful histories and traditions that go back generations. But for those seeking to build a new sustainable innovation along our coast, I want to see action taken in concrete ways to build the connectivity and networks that cultivate not only sustainable practices and husbandry of our resources, but equitable access and collaboration as we shepherd our human capital in an inclusive and respectful way. Thank you.
Great. We'll invite up next Jason Mitchell from Whole Oceans for a story of new opportunities, new beginnings.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Sandy. Great presentation. Impressive Angels group. I look forward to seeing more there. Jason Mitchell. I am president and COO of Whole Oceans. I'm in the aquaculture business, and I'm growing increasingly more passionate about aquaculture, specifically land-based applications. But my background is not in aquaculture. My background is in the defense industry. I've been a defense contractor working for General Dynamics for 17 years, mainly in the shipbuilding industry, and most recently here at BAW, building destroyers. Turns out if you can build a destroyer, you can probably build a fish farm. But you might say after 17 years, I had a mid-career reflection point where I began to think about what would be in the second half. And similar to what Rob said, I think that coupled with living in Maine for an extended period changed me. And I began to go down a thought pattern that I wanted something maybe not bigger is the wrong word, maybe not even more meaningful, because I always got meaning out of building ships, but different. Maybe a double impact type of a perspective. Enter Whole Oceans, right? So the macro level thesis of Whole Oceans is really what attracted me to this opportunity. And I know by nature of being here, you're pretty well subscribed to seafood and aquaculture, so I'll spare you the long explanation here. But just to kind of frame the discussion and give some perspective, when you look, the discussion really starts with food and protein, right? There's a growing deficit in protein globally. When you look across the main sources of protein, you think about terrestrial and seafood as two broad categories. But if you think through chicken and pig and cows and then the range of seafood, and in this case specifically finfish, and eventually you get down to, on that decision tree, down to Atlantic salmon, which is what our product is. You start to compare and contrast those options with edible yield, food conversion ratios, environmental impact, health implications, and yes, even economics. And you quickly start to get down to seafood and aquaculture, and specifically land-based aquaculture as being a real viable solution to help with the food and the protein discussion. Now, specifically for Atlantic salmon domestically, in the US, we consume 23 times more Atlantic salmon than we produce, right? So there's a huge trade deficit. 500,000 tons of Atlantic salmon is imported to the US annually. That comes from three basic regions. The Nordic region, there's three countries, Norway, Denmark, and Scotland. You also have Chile and Canada. So those three regions are really, for the most, supplying the majority of that 500,000 tons annually. So you think about even just the logistics of distribution, right? It's a centralized model and that gets distributed, which in itself has a carbon footprint impact, and also maybe 25% of the price you pay for salmon has to do with that logistics problem. So progress in technology and science around land-based aquaculture solutions has opened up a new means and allows us to approach this with a decentralized type model. With land-based solutions, now we can have aquaculture in places that were previously prohibitive. So recirculating looks like I'm, okay, there we go, excuse me. Didn't know that was gonna happen. The technology is recirculating land-based aquaculture, or RAS for short. This really started with municipal water treatment plants. That technology evolved. Net pen aquaculture adapted it to grow eggs to smolt before they transferred into the net pens. And the net pen operators began to realize the longer they kept the smolt in the land-based side of the operation, the more success they had on the net pen, less mortalities. So over time, the duration that the smolt have stayed on land has grown. And now the technology is evolving to a level, the technology and the science really, have evolved to a level where we can bring the fish through the full life cycle to full grow out, particularly around how we manage energy. The energy management and the power cost is a big piece of enabling this technology for a wider application. But as you can see, there's a host of benefits that come with that. The control that you get in that environment is a big part of it. That enables better biosecurity and reduces the need for things like antibiotics and hormones, and ultimately results in a better product. So you might ask, why Maine? Well, the short answer there is the water. For the same reasons that Atlantic salmon are a native species, it's also attractive for aquaculture. Yes, land-based aquaculture could have applications in other areas, but there's other reasons besides water that we think Maine is the best option. To start, New England in general and Maine specifically have a heritage of seafood in the seafood industry, the working waterfront, and with that comes an already established supply chain, support network, and a distribution network. In this case, Boston is a major seafood hub, so proximity to that also helps us bring our fish to market. But most of all, the reason for Maine is the people. There are authentic, genuine craftsmen, good people who appreciate the working waterfront, and those are all qualities that are a part of our production and we intend to emulate in our product. So if you were to drive from here about 2 hours, 24 minutes, and 35 seconds, you would go, I know because I do it often, right? You would go over the Fort Knox Bridge, and if you looked to the left or west, you would see a big industrial area. Originally, 150 years ago, that was a tannery. Then it was a paper mill for at least 100 years. And most recently in 2014, that Verso paper mill closed. It was a distressed asset bought by a Canadian scrap company. And Whole Oceans intends to have that with our first site in our Maine-based location. So demo is underway. We intend to start blasting and grading and leveling the ground and construction later this year. The existing infrastructure that's there from the mill has a lot of reuse for us, which is a major advantage. But the best part of Bucksport is also the people. And I have to tell you, my relationship with the community and the local government has been phenomenal and has further changed me down that shift of values. And I've learned a lot by interfacing with the people and trying to establish this project there. The best example of how successful our collaboration has been is on the workforce development front. It has happened so organically, just because people are interested and we've got a collaborative relationship and mutual respect, and we've all become passionate about it. So we're involved in the local schools, the local universities. We're shaping curriculum, and we're already starting down the path of starting to shape and develop our workforce. So I started off telling you about my defense contractor career, my values shift, and my global aspirations and my big ideas about how to jump into the second half of my career. I would tell you my involvement with Bucksport has humbled me in a different way. And really that meaning that I was searching for had nothing to do with aquaculture or the global aspirations at all. It was really right in front of me the whole time. And working with the people in Bucksport has been outstanding. Really proud to be a part of their community. Looking forward to being a part of the Maine working waterfront. My vision, my big idea for the day, my postcard for the future is industrial, environmentally friendly, socially responsible. And that's what Whole Ocean's setting out to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We're going to stay a little more close to home and just go down the road here in Portland. I want to welcome Chris Thompson up to the front of the room to share his story. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Thompson. I'm one of the developers and owners of the Thompson's Point project, which is a 30-acre peninsula at the gateway to Portland, next to the jetport, highway, a bus, metro, train, trails, and the Fore River. We have a craft brewery, distillery, winery, software design firm, 2 indoor event venues, an outdoor skating rink, concert venue, and to my knowledge, the only international cryptozoology museum, which had over 30,000 visitors a year last year, proud to say. I started my career as a cultural history professor at the Maine College of Art and made the seamless move into real estate in the early 2000s. I was born and raised in Maine, went away to college and grad school, and always hoped to find a way back home, and at one point realized that hope ultimately is really what you make it. As a teacher of young artists, creative, associative, passionate thinkers and makers, whose job is to figure out what art is, what it means, and why they and we should care about it, I like to start my courses with MECA students by sharing this inspiring quote from a book called Municipal Mind by Toronto's poet laureate Pierre Giorgio de Sico, about how we ought to look at the truly creative city. He says, quote, "You can't enforce an attitude, neither can you legislate the human heart. You can, however, inspire it by an example of passion and risk-taking in an atmosphere in which passion and risk-taking can take place. This is the job of the city at large," he says, "to understand that passion and risk begin in daily encounter on the canvas of everyday life. At the same time," he goes on, "a city's art must give the impression that art is as indispensable a thing as water or food, elementary and elemental to the quality of life," end of quote. So what does that all mean? I'm not entirely sure, but we've decided that it's our job at Thompson's Point to try and figure it out. My partner, Jed Trobe, and I have come to think of Thompson's Point as a laboratory for building community. We started the project back in 2009, and over the last decade, Thompson's Point has become a bit of a petri dish. Every time we add a new tenant, a new art form, a new venue, a new collaboration, the culture of the dish changes just a little bit. And we have to step back and assess what we've done, what we've added, and what it means. Sometimes the results are clear and immediate. Sometimes they are opaque and latent and won't show up for years or maybe more. But in all instances, we try and ask ourselves, but in all instances, we try, whenever we are attempting something new, to ask ourselves, and when we've been successful, we've been really disciplined about asking ourselves, what could only happen here? What building or initiative or piece of programming or new tenant could only Thompson's Point be home to. We try and start there and circle back to that at each step. So think of the Petri dish as a living culture, and think of culture as having at least two meanings. One is the actual physical mesh of organisms that take the risk of living in an open, creative, engaged neighborhood. The other meaning of culture is the broader sense of a fabric of practices that we carbon-based life forms engage in to try to find and make meaning for ourselves. Ultimately, I think it all comes back to art, which in its Latin origin, ars, A-R-S, means, quote, to fit. Any culture ultimately, I think, is about figuring out what its core practices are that help to find a way to fit in a rapidly evolving world. For us, real estate development starts as an art form. We held ourselves to this principle at the outset of our project. By starting the project by planting a grove of 4 living sculptures called the Tree of 40 Fruit. It's a project by former University of Maine Professor Sam Van Aken, whereby he grafts up to 40 different varieties of heirloom stone fruit, so fruit with a pit, peaches, plums, nectarines, etc. We've even had almonds, onto the same tree. So when it's blossom time, there's a wave of variegated tones of color, texture, and the like. And then these little trees, or 4 of them, bear fruit like you wouldn't believe. They're about 6-7 feet high, and they'll each fill a box about so big at harvest time. In fact, they bore so much that we had to engage child labor to help us harvest and glean the fruit. But these kids, you can see down here, they were kids of a couple of the tenants. They took it a step further, giving it the flavor of field research and a little bit of a taste test. This installation was the first part of Thompson's Point to be finished and completed, and actually at finished grade. So the rest of Thompson's Point over the years has come up to meet this grove. It mattered to us that we showed really ourselves and our partners and tenants and visitors that art and creative practice really is where our project has to live, has to start, and has to circle back to at every step, not something that gets added on later with a sculpture in the atrium or something like that, but really is integral to the design of the project itself. And we've tried to stay true to this openness to risk, to creative community building in the neighborhood that we're working with so many partners to create at Thompson's Point, which, by the way, just happens to be called Thompson's Point. I should have a better story to tell about that, but it was named that long before I came along. It's been messy, it's been full of friction, and indeed it has been all about passion and risk. But I think that in order for any of us to take this thing we call hope and actually put it into practice, that's really the only way we know how to come at it. So what we've tried to do is to build a culture where we can show ourselves, our kids, our families, our partners, our tenants, and our patrons and guests that we can take risk together and trust each other to create a community based at once on civility and passion. Our tenants in particular actually really are our greatest partners, as they quite often know far more about what we're really doing than we do, and we try hard to listen to them and learn from them about how to be the kind of place that they can continue to love and invest in. At the end of the day, we're trying to ask what it means to treat our project as an unfolding art form, a collaborative one, and to hold back on doing anything unless and until we can be sure that we'll be proud to see it on the face of the earth. Thank you very much.
Great. All right, we're going to go on a long trip now and invite a dear friend of ours that we met about 10 years ago, Alton Ballance from Ocracoke in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, has a great story to share with us. Come on up, Alton.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alton Ballance, and I'm from the Outer Banks town of Ocracoke. And my connection to Maine and the Island Institute began a decade ago when I invited Rob Snyder and board member at the time, Dave Thomas, to come and participate in a seminar that I was conducting for North Carolina public school teachers called Island People, Island Culture. One of the things that we were studying was that islands everywhere had a lot of characteristics of islandness. And we invited them, and a year later, I was fortunate enough to come back to Maine and speak at the Sustainable Islands Conference. So whether I am talking to students or teachers, trying to get them to understand the special place where we live on the Outer Banks of North Carolina and my home of Ocracoke, I like to start with that global view. That view that puts us strategically halfway between Maine and Florida. And we jut out, and by the process, the fact of jutting out, we catch the hurricanes. And we have a lot of things going on culturally as well as environmentally. This is our land of water. You have a tremendous land of water here in Maine. This is our eastern North Carolina land of water. My good friend, coastal geologist and marine geologist Stan Riggs would say that we have about 10,000 miles of where land touches water in this photograph. And Ocracoke is right there where the arrow is. This is one of the most dynamic places on earth. This is our graveyard of the Atlantic. I know there's one in Cape Cod, but this is off Cape Hatteras. And this is a significant place where the cold Labrador currents from here come down and mix with the Gulf Stream waters coming up from the south, creating this vast diamond shoals. That's why the nation's tallest lighthouse is there, to get that elevation to shine out over those long shoals, a dozen miles or so. Ocracoke is to the south of that. And by the way, sometimes fishermen down there manage to harvest a Maine lobster right in that cold Labrador current. This is the island of Ocracoke where I live, sandwiched between Hatteras Inlet on the right, Ocracoke Inlet on the left. We're about 15 miles long. Cape Hatteras Diamond Shoals is up at the very far right. And during the hurricane of 2003, Hurricane Isabel, Hatteras Village was separated by an inlet caused by a hurricane. The roads at the north end of Ocracoke, Highway 12, also damaged, so that made us not passable as far as our main route. Also, the ferry route going from Hatteras to Ocracoke that used to be 35 minutes increased to 1 hour because of the shoaling in the inlets. So the process of intense storms, the damage to Highway 12 has continued to challenge us. Here's our village. You'll notice that it's not located next to the ocean. It's located next to the Pamlico Sound. And when my ancestors in the 1700s on both sides came to Ocracoke, they looked around, they could have had the whole island, and they thought, okay, we have to build a house with a hammer and a handsaw. Where do we want it? On the shifting beaches and the sand, or next to this 300-year-old live oak? And they chose the live oak, and that's why those Outer Banks villages are strategically placed there. Here's one of the things I want to focus on. This is on the Outer Banks community of Rodanthe, north of Ocracoke, and this is obviously a lot of sand after a hurricane. That's Hurricane Isabel. The road was covered up. Look at the far house on the very top on the beach. That's the house that was used in Nights in Rodanthe film. Okay, so this is 2003. A few years later, another hurricane swept in there, and that's what happened. So it damaged the road, the beach moved or disappeared. That house got moved right before that. So today, in response to the increase in storms, sea level rise, the destruction of Highway 12, the lack of commitment to infrastructure, that road is being bypassed with the jug handle bridge. I like to put the oyster in there because you find these oyster shells on the beach where they don't grow. Why are they there? They're there because that's where a salt marsh was at one time when that shoreline was hundreds of yards offshore. There's my friend Stan Riggs preaching about don't build on the beach. This is his vision. He's 80 years old, and one of his last statements is going to be this vision of land of water, a place that can bring together the science and the culture and make it more sustainable. Of course, this is below sea level. The light green is less than a foot above sea level. and moving on toward higher places. Where it separates down the red line, that's where the ocean was 125 to 75,000 years ago, very significantly geologically. Here's his vision, is that these small, struggling eastern North Carolina towns that have a water possibility can become a string of pearls that can be connected with ecotourism and ferries and all kinds of things, because there's the potential for the collapse of the Outer Banks, because intense storms are likely to do that. And leaving just small places like Ocracoke and Cape Hatteras and Rodanthe. So his preaching is that we must have a combined understanding of the geological processes that are moving these islands, taking the sand away, the possibility that you could put some sand in some places, it's not going to work in others. The biological processes that salt marshes, need to be protected because of our fisheries. The human culture and economies, how so many are dependent on the natural resources, just like here in Maine. People come to see your beautiful natural resources on these islands. They do the same thing for us. His vision is that working together with local, state, and federal partners, that there should be ways to develop sustainable economies, even if the traditional ways of getting there are challenged, that we must create new ways to get there, new ways to do business. And I think about that all the time I get on a ferry, and the ferry ride gets longer. And as an islander, I'm most concerned about, all right, where are we going? What will my children, how will they be able to get to Ocracoke? All islands have these tremendous challenges, but there are also tremendous opportunities. Transportation links us all together. We got to get there. Creative economies tied to our natural resources, our sustainable fisheries. Thank you again. I look forward to more opportunities with the Island Institute.
Nice work, Alton. Thank you, Alton. We've got Casco Bay represent in the house. Marci Train from Long Island, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Marci Train, and I'm from Long Island. And for those of you who don't know where Long Island is, we're a 45-minute ferry ride from Portland. We have about 200 people year-round, and we do not have a car ferry. So once the cars get there, they're there. So I went out to Long Island about 25 years ago when they seceded from Portland, which was quite an interesting time to go out there because I went out as their teacher, and at the time I was the kindergarten first and second grade teacher. And everything was new. We had to write our teacher contract from scratch, which was very interesting. I now am teaching 3 through 5. I guess I didn't mention it's a 2-room schoolhouse, and we have a total of 16 children, which is amazing because we can do so much with them. So when I first moved out to Long Island, the first 3 years I was there, I was a sternman in the summer times where I baited and swung traps. And I'm mentioning that because going along with the changes that I've seen since I've been out there. When I was first sterning out there, we would haul 850 traps a day, come in for lunch, get up the next morning, do it all over again. And as most of you know, now there's a trap limit of 800 because there's so many people out there fishing now that they had to have a trap limit in place. And although the fisheries aren't down, there's so many people trying to make a living that the money isn't there. When I first was out there, to get a job on the back of the boat was very hard because a lot of people wanted to work on the back of a boat. And so there were a lot of young people who lived on the island that couldn't wait to go out and be a sternman. Actually, I had trouble with the kids at school because they told me that, why do I have to stay in school? I can go on the back of a boat and make more money than you. They were right. However, times have changed, and I think that they realize now that that isn't always the best opportunity for them. So what's happened over the years is we have lost a lot of young people on our island, and when we're trying to get stern men out to the island, it's usually someone from town, which makes it a little more difficult. Another thing I wanted to add is I'm also a fireman out on Long Island and have been since I was there. And the reason that I started doing that is because I was on the island every day, all day, and I did not want to get to a fire and not be able to help. So I went to the local fire department and I signed up and I started training. If there's one thing I've learned about living on the island is you don't wait for someone else to do something. You jump in and you do it. And you're there to help, you train to help no matter what it is. You don't wait for somebody else. And I'll lead into something else with that in a few seconds. Consequently, my husband then joined the fire department, and now my two daughters, 18 and 21, are also on the fire department with us. So it's one of those, when you're an islander, you wear many hats. I've volunteered at the library as their children's librarian in the summer also, and I teach gymnastics. So you name it, you do it. You don't wait for someone else to do it. So about 5 years ago, the Island Institute came up to me and said, hey, do you want to learn about kelp and aquaculture? And I thought, that sounds amazing. Sure, I'd love to know what it was all about. So we went to this seminar up in Herringut. And along with Herringut, Island Institute, and Hurricane Island all had this great program where we learned how to do kelp. To be honest, I had no idea anything about kelp. I didn't even know why people grew kelp. The whole thing just sounded interesting. Well, from there I learned all the benefits of kelp, not only health-wise, but also the fact that it's a great way to supplement anyone who is in the lobstering business. So to help supplement the lobster business, we're trying to promote people to grow kelp because it's a great way to offset the season. You put your kelp in the fall after your traps are up, and it grows all winter long. And then you harvest it in the spring, get your traps out there, and so it's another way to make money. It's another way to have young people on the island. It's another way to connect to the ocean, have a job on the ocean, and be out on the coast or on the island. The really cool thing about this is, so I decided that I was going to have my kelp line for my kids and teach the kids, because what better way to teach people about anything is you teach the kids, and then they teach their parents, and then they teach the community. Sounded great. And then I talked to the Island Institute. They asked me if I would help them write up a curriculum. So together with Erin Love, who was my Island Fellow at the time, and Yvonne Thomas, who was the educational person at the time, we created a whole curriculum. And where we were the very first school to have a kelp line, now it is our 4th year, and I guess many students around, not just Maine, but around the country are doing their own kelp line to learn more about kelp. Very interesting, though, we have an education kelp line, and I brought my kids through the whole process of how to set it up, what we needed for equipment, how we needed an LPA, which is a limited purpose application, in order to have it with the state, who we needed to contact to make that happen. I brought them through the whole process because I thought that that was very important to do. And so they could learn exactly what they were doing, what they needed to do. And it was wonderful because we had open house, we brought the parents in, we harvest our kelp. We're really good at kelp popcorn, where we dehydrate the kelp and put it over our popcorn. And it was a wonderful experience, and everybody's like, great, would love to do kelp, what a great idea. And then we found out that we couldn't have kelp off of our island because of the way the water lines were drawn. So technically, it's not saying that our water isn't good, it's saying that it hasn't been tested enough to show that it's good. So what do? And this goes back to you don't wait for someone to do something. You don't just sit there One of my third graders looked up at me and said, "You know, this kelp thing is really fun. I think I could do this when I get big. Could you please find a way to have the water okay for us for when I am old enough to have my own business?" And I was like, oh no, here we go again. So at the present time, I've been working, and it's taken a year to get together, and I did have some help from Island Institute kind of pushing towards that way, which I really am thankful for. But at this time, I have a group of about 9 people who have gone online, got trained on water sampling, have done the hands-on water sampling with the state. And so once a month, I have people who take a sample of the water and we send it to the state, and hopefully in about 2 or 3 years, we will be able to say, hey, we can do aquaculture off of our island. Now, at the present time, I think there are 3 people who have their own aquaculture, since we've started, who have their own aquaculture business. We're close to the island, but not off of our island. They're in the waters that have been deemed clean. And although we have our line, and it's fine, and kelp is fine, in order for it to be marketable, you need to have that label of clean water, if you're wondering. And then with this shellfish, you do, no matter what, need that labeling of clean water. So I guess my selling point is this: if you want something done, first of all, you teach the kids, because they're really good at teaching everybody else. And second of all, well, going back to the fireman thing, I'm pushing 48, and I don't want to be the one who has to run into a burning building. We need younger people on islands, so we need to make sure that islands are affordable and that there are enough jobs. We need younger people in the cities of Portland, our cities on the coast. So we need to make sure that we find ways that are more affordable. But I guess my total final section on this would be, if there's one thing I learned, you don't wait for other people to do something. If something needs to be done, jump in and do it. Thank you.
All right. Right down the street, we're staying local again. We're really pleased to have Xavier Botana from the Portland Public Schools join us. Thank you.
So I'm going to break with tradition and actually use the podium. That's right. When I was first invited to be here today, frankly, I was just a little bit surprised. At first, I thought maybe it was because I was born on an island, albeit a different kind of island. Then I thought maybe it was an ambush, because I once proposed closing an island school. Okay, I know that's paranoid. That's why I'm behind the podium. Honestly, despite my birthplace, until 3 years ago, I really didn't know very much about islands, island schools, or island life. Coming from the Midwest, I grew up in the Chicago area, island schools were a completely new thing for me. When I first became Portland Superintendent and talked with my friends about my new district, they were frankly amazed. None of them really knew anything or had ever thought about island schools. To this date, when I have friends come out and visit, the reaction is almost universal that it's cute that we have island schools. My understanding has evolved significantly over the past 3 years, and I have mentors to thank for that, such as my board member, Lori Davis, who's here with us today, as well as Yvonne Thomas and Suzanne MacDonald. And I want to thank them for helping me to begin to understand the unique culture of Maine Islands and the central role that a school has on the preservation of that culture. But today I'm here to challenge us to think about a reality that faces many island communities and to leverage an opportunity that I know particularly well as superintendent of Portland's school district, Maine's largest and most diverse school district. While many districts around Maine have lost population over the past 10 years, Portland's enrollment has remained relatively stable. But that stability belies the reality that without immigrant enrollment, our population would have decreased dramatically. This slide shows you what our enrollment would have looked like without immigrant students enrolling in the Portland Public Schools. This shows you the rate of increase of our immigrant population during that period of time. And contrast that, if you will, with the rate of enrollment loss in our island schools during that same period of time. But what would happen, But what would happen if the islands worked deliberately and aggressively to attract and leverage the same immigrant population that has kept Portland school enrollment stable? I have a theory. Not only would the island population grow, but the islands would also benefit from everything else that comes with that diversity. At the Portland Public Schools, we proudly hold as our value proposition that in our classrooms, students learn side by side with others who have entirely different life experiences. Every day, they challenge each other to think about the world in ways that they would never have thought of if it weren't for that exposure. They speak different languages, they come from different religions and religious traditions, and above all, they have different ways of looking at the world. And that is what makes us in the Portland Public Schools unique and special in Maine, in the Maine context and even in the national context. Think about it. Every major university in this country works extremely hard to look the way that our schools look. And they don't do that because of some vague notion of diversity and diversity being good. And they don't even do it because they know that their graduates are someday going to be working side by side with that same cultural religious mix that I described. They do it because they know that diverse learning environments unlock those new ways of looking at the world. Research has shown that diverse teams are better problem solvers. They're more accurate, they're more evidence-driven, and they're more innovative. More recent research shows that these teams are also more economically profitable. So my big idea for today is that islands, and indeed the Maine coast, will thrive to the extent that we embrace and pursue the opportunities that come with ethnic, cultural, and linguistic diversity. A major theme of the conference and of the presenters that came before me is island resilience. One definition of resilience from the Merriam-Webster dictionary is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. In other words, resilience is the ability to adapt. My challenge to all of us here today who care about and want to preserve the viability of Maine's island communities and with it help the Maine coast to thrive is to think about how we can adapt to that demographic reality that we heard Marci talk about and do just that. Thank you very much.